Hello, I am Mayur, and my presentation is on what people believe. Do people believe what they were told regarding 9/11, whether they believe the truth? On September 11, 2001, 19 terrorists associated with the Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 planes and carried out suicide attacks on targets within the United States. 2 of the planes were used to fly into the World Trade Center towers in New York City. The third plane was used to fly into the Pentagon, which is in Washington, D.C., and the 4th plane crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. Often referred to as 9/11, the attacks resulted in extensive death and destruction, and it triggered the major US initiatives to combat terrorism, and it defined the presidency of George Bush, president at the time. Over 3,000 people were killed during the attacks in New York City and Washington, D.C., including more than 400 police officers and firefighters. Many 9/11 conspiracy theories surfaced shortly after the September 11th attacks. Some brought compelling arguments onto the table, and some weren't that believable at all. Theorists believed that the World Trade Center buildings were demolished by bombs, that the calls that were made from the planes before they went into the buildings were faked or staged, because you can't get signal that high up when you're on a plane, and that the president, George Bush, he profited from the attacks as well, because he knew about them before they happened. My goal was to find out whether the public believed what they were told by the media on this fateful day. For my research, I will be using both qualitative and quantitative research methods. The qualitative data will consist of finding existing research on the subject of 9/11 through the magazine articles that were published at the time and interviews that were conducted with members of the intelligence agencies that were investigating the attack in 9/11 and other newspaper articles and so on. Most of this research will be primary and applied research. The data gathered will help develop ideas for the quantitative research I will do later on. The quantitative research will consist of getting the views and opinions of the public on the matter and transferring the numerical data into usable statistics for me to understand the public's opinion on this view in an easier way. The 4 main areas of doing within my research were the architects behind the attack, so who actually planned it. We know that there were 19 terrorists involved in the attack, but who asked the terrorists to carry out the attacks was a big question within my research. The terrorists themselves, it must have cost a lot of money to get onto the planes with fake passports and creating the explosives and everything else, so they must have needed a lot of money. Where did the terrorists get the money from? Was one thing I researched into. George Bush's war on terror. 9/11 was one of the main reasons why George Bush started his war within the Middle East. It gave him a reason to start the war and invade Iraq and Afghanistan. Did George Bush purposely have reason to do this? So did he know beforehand that the attacks were going to happen so he can invade Iraq and Afghanistan? And my final area for research was whether bombs and explosives were used to bring the towers down, because planes it was a big theory at the time that the planes couldn't themselves bring the towers down, so would the towers have been blown up from the inside was the main area of research. Who planned the attack? Much of the evidence establishing who did the crime is dubious and miraculous. Bags full of incriminating material was found on the people that were on the flight, and they just happened to miss the flight checks. And there was a passport lying on the ground of the World Trade Center. You just happened to survive the plane crash. So these are some of the groups around the world which are known to have been behind the attack. They have their fingers pointed at by other intelligence agencies around the world. The most important one was Al Qaeda, who were blamed for the attack by the majority of the intelligence agencies. There have been suggestions that Saudi Arabia has some responsibility, having helped finance the Al Qaeda terrorists and allowing the organization to flourish as well within their country. There have been claims that the 9/11 investigation into Al Qaeda was blocked by higher ups within the intelligence agencies investigating what happened into 9/11, where they were told to back off investigating the Bin Ladens and the Saudi royal family. They were told to stay away from them and just stick to what happened in the United States. So there's a good chance that they were financed by the Saudi royal family. "9/11 was supposed to provide the way for an open-ended global and perpetual war on terror against any enemy, foreign or domestic, that the executive branch within the United States chose to designate, regardless of whether evidence existed to actually connect these enemies to 9/11. So once the war on terror had begun, it paved the way for other wars to happen during the Obama administration as well. So the Libyan war, the Syrian war currently happening, has paved the way for a lot of wars to happen. George Bush claimed that there was no way anyone within the United States, the intelligence agencies, could have planned for the attack. But a lot of the directors within the intelligence agencies and people within the CIA knew that the attack was coming soon. These are just some of the people that believe that bombs and explosives were used within the World Trade Center towers to bring the towers down themselves. It's a common theory at the time that the fuel within the planes could not have burned at a hot enough temperature to burn the metal steel frames of the building and bring the whole tower down. A lot of physicists and engineers and architects have come together and tried to bring the truth for the attacks, but it's come to no avail. The primary research I conducted, these relate to the demographic questions. As you can see, I questioned a wide range of people from both genders, a wide different range of ages, different races of people and their religious beliefs, and a wide range of educated people as well. So I get a good balance between each of the demographic. As for the questions related to my topic, I started by asking whether the people knew of the 9/11 attacks. Out of the 26 people I interviewed, each and every single one of them knew about the attacks. The next question I asked them was how many buildings, from their knowledge, were attacked or demolished in some way on 9/11 itself. The majority of people thought there were only 2 towers that were brought down on that day. it is in fact 4 buildings that were brought down, including the 2 World Trade Center towers. There was the attack on the Pentagon in Washington DC, and there was World Trade Center 7 building that wasn't flown into by a bomb, but it was controlled demolition on the same day as 9/11, which was a bit of a coincidence, seeing as it's right next to the World Trade Center tower buildings. The third question I asked was where, from the previous slide with all the different agencies, who they thought was responsible for the attack on 9/11. Out of the 8 possible options, only 2 came up on the survey, and the majority of people thought Al-Qaeda were responsible. There were some people who thought the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency within the United States, were responsible, and they did it as an inside job, but the majority thought it was still Al-Qaeda. As for financing, the majority of people didn't know where the terrorists got the money from. So that was a new thing for them. And as for the war on terror, the majority thought it was not used by George Bush to start his war within the Middle East. And they also thought the planes were used to bring the towers down and not bombs and explosives. As you can see here, 86% of people thought that it was actually planes. As for the conclusion, I did round up all the results I got from my surveys and portrayed them in a graph as to how close they were to the truth. The majority of people knew about 9/11 and they were right. They were correct about the bombs, but concerning the other things, they were far off. And it shows that they don't know as much about 9/11 because the United States are good with keeping things hidden from the public. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thanks, Mayur. Any questions?
You know when you list the religions, you listed one called Jainism. What is that?
Jainism is a religion within India. It's a small set of people that believe in Jain. It's kind of like a sub-religion to Hinduism, but they more restricted on what they eat, so they don't eat any food that comes from the ground or anything.
What other foods don't come from the ground?
Root vegetables, or
Yeah.
do they? But they'll eat fruit from trees.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
technically the tree comes from the ground.
But the fruit doesn't.
Well, the fruit
They're
doesn't-
they're a non-violent sect of
Yeah.
of Hinduism.
And
Yeah,
then the fruit has
peaceful.
to fall on the ground, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Try
I
and catch
understand
it
the
before it
people.
falls.
I understand the people.
Okay. Anything?
Oh yeah. So you said George Bush made a benefit. Do you mean like financial benefit or like a political kind of benefit?
Both financially and politically, because there were a lot of problems with the stock trading at the time as well. A lot of them closed their stocks before the 9/11 attack happened, and it paved the way for him to start other wars within the Middle East. The war in Libya, where they wanted Gaddafi dead for the gold that he was having in the country, that was planned for a long time from George Bush's era. So there were political reasons as well behind 9/11.
I mean, I don't get how people don't believe. I mean, the way, when you see the videos about how 9/11 happened, you know, how the planes crashed into it, how can people not notice that when, I mean, how does a building come like down? How does that happen? And then people don't believe, they say, oh yeah, it's just from a bomb from above.
That's one of the things I did extensive research on. A lot of people thought the planes were they used CGI to draw the planes onto the buildings and make them crash into them. I mean, in 1993, I think it was, Jurassic Park came out, and that was a landmark for CGI, where they made dinosaurs come alive and all kinds of things. Making two planes hit two different buildings isn't that hard to do in CGI, so
But then you have witnesses that were there, like
That's-
phones and film cameras.
Yeah, there's plenty of eyewitness footage, and the towers were designed to withstand earthquakes. So two planes hitting them, not quite an earthquake. But yeah, there's a lot of, and I think it's the U.S. government's lack of transparency and lack of being forthright that made a lot of these, that gave a lot of credibility to these conspiracy theories. There's a lot of withheld information which makes people's imaginations go wild and gets people thinking about different possibilities. So I think it's the lack of honesty really didn't do the U.S. government many favors.
How fast was the plane going when it hit the building?
I have no idea.
They go from like cruising speed, like 600 miles an hour, and just straight into a building. And wouldn't the building go like, was at least not the top?
There's structural engineers that will dispute that. That's not anything that we can talk. We can find out about your presentation, but your presentation was all very, very well organized, and your presentation was very evenly paced. You were able to get your information out in a very, very clever variety of ways. I'm very happy with how it was presented. One question with you had a number of people that were speaking that stated that they believed that they came down through some type of controlled demolition. One of your sources was Charlie Sheen.
He's come out to agree with that theory on national TV, saying that he agrees that bombs and explosives were used to bring the towers down. He was one of the people that agreed with the theory.
Okay. I just wondered, like a source of information like that, does he lend more credibility to this idea, or just because of his reputation?
Yeah, just because of his reputation. So I think when someone famous says something, more people tend to listen to that person rather than someone that's less known. and
Okay.
less